Okay. Well, I'm gonna try something a little different today because I have quite a long drive, and yeah, it just struck me that I might be able to get this kind of stuff out while I'm driving without a huge incident or issue. Um, Hopefully, the audio works because I don't know how many times I'll be able to attempt this, but. Um, yeah, I have no idea how this is going to go or whether this is going to be beneficial. Hopefully, hopefully it works out all right for me, and then maybe the rest will come together at some point. I think the moral of this story or collection of stories uh, would just be that for me, holding grudges and anger was a massive part of my identity through childhood, um, kind of into my 20s. It was something that I held on to pretty tightly for a long time, actually. Like, I don't know that I really released a lot of it until very recently. Um, but I what am I trying to say? I was very resistant to the idea of changing those thoughts at all. And I had a lot of bitterness and anger and resentment towards my life, towards the things that happened when I grew up that, in my opinion, especially at the time, shaped me and controlled how I was living. And I think that is sort of the important part of that, was that as far as I was concerned, there was no way for me to change because these things had happened to me and this is who I was, because this is the kind of person that you get when those kinds of things happen to somebody. And so, as much as it's bad and these things are not good and blah, 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 it was an excuse to not have to change, and it was an excuse for my actions for a long time, because that's what you get when you do that to somebody. And so there's no way to change, and it's not my fault. And like, again, there's a lot of stuff that you can read and listen to that does sort of kind of go along this line of like, it is unfair, it's not okay, it shouldn't have happened, these things are justified, it's not your fault, blah blah blah. But the point is that when you hand over control and you remove yourself from the consequences of change and remove yourself from any liability as far as your actions, then there is no need to change, and you can just continue to blame it, and in some regards you are justified in that you were wronged in some way, maybe not to the extent that you believe, but overall you were wronged, and so in this scenario, it's like you're not actually in the wrong, but what what help does it do to hang on to that? Like, what help does it do to continue to be a victim for your whole life, even if you were a victim? And this is the other part of that, is that, like, at some point you have to stop being a victim, because the stuff is not happening to you anymore. It stopped happening a really long time ago. And I heard a good framing once of, like, how long are you going to let something that happened to you control your life? Like, and not to dismiss the kinds of pain and things that people go through, but it's, are you gonna let, and this is a minimization, but, like, imagine letting somebody control your life 20 years later because they bullied you in school, or something. So, like, it's not happening anymore, and you're continuing to live your entire life shaped around this thing. And, like, it can be traumatic, and it can be harmful, and it can be an awful experience, but when it's not happening anymore, like, how many more years are you going to carry that kind of pain with you? And you're now the abuser, because you're the one reliving it. It's not, that abuser is not there punishing you anymore. You're the one bringing that person with you everywhere you go. You're making that experience real every day now. And again, I'm not minimizing any kind of pain or suffering or anything like that. It was a lot of things that I went through were really, really hard for me, and really, really hard to let go. Like, really, really, really hard to let go. Harder than, I would say, even the experiences. It was harder to stop letting that be a part of my identity. I was the person that went through this, and that's why I get to act like this, and that's why I get to do these things. And if I'm not that person anymore, then all these things that I'm doing are not okay anymore. And then what? Then I'm just the bad person. And so, circling back to that, it's I never thought that I would let go of these grudges or this pain or and so I cut out huge portions of my life almost permanently, because of that. I'm never gonna forgive these people, and I'm never gonna. There's no way I could ever let these people back in my life. There's no way that I could ever see this situation differently to where these people be okay, and so because of that, I've destroyed all kinds of records of my life, because I couldn't even handle looking at them. I couldn't handle looking, like, just the thought of looking at the pictures of who I was. Like, it was that was traumatic for me. I remember I got 4 or 5 scrapbooks of pictures, and as soon as I opened the box, I burned them, because I couldn't even handle looking at the book of pictures, not even the pictures, just knowing that there was pictures of a life in there that I couldn't handle processing was too much for me. Like, I couldn't even look at the book to think about what was in it. And yeah, kind of circle around to like some point of where I'm going with all this is just that if this ever in some form comes across some person at some point in their life that is struggling with something similar, I would say that at some point in your life, it is likely that you are going to wish that you didn't destroy all that stuff. And so if there's even a second of hesitation and somehow somebody comes across this, I would say just put it away and don't destroy it. And this comes from sort of like layers of pain and rejection and a lot of things that, disclaimer, stuff that I say is definitely tainted by my perception, and even some of the stuff that I'm recounting would be explained in the form as it was experienced and not even necessarily as I would see it today, because there is a lot of things that have happened over the years where I've sort of changed how I see the world, and changed how some of the experiences are reflected, just because there's things that I wasn't able to see or accept that had happened. And again, this is like a compounding issue that was like built up from a life of warped thinking. And I'm saying this so from like a young age, like I'm saying this as somebody that wishes that I hadn't erased my whole past, so that I could reflect on it now from a different view. And this is coming from a place where, like, when I was 14 or 15, I had an imaginary funeral for my entire family in my head, because I was alone, and that was the only way that I could process having nowhere to turn anymore. And so I imagined that everybody died in like a car accident and I was at their funeral, and that's why nobody was around anymore, and I couldn't face it any other way. And so that was just how I got through it. And this, like, that was like a real experience for me. Like, it was very vivid, and I was like sleeping in a playground at the time, and I remember it was cold, and I remember just going through it, and like having to say goodbye to all these people, because it was the only way to kind of keep moving forward. And I've had to do that a few times in my life, but and again, I have it was traumatic for me at the time, but that wasn't actually how that had to go, and it still was partially in my life, or partially my choice to live that way, and to make that my reality of being alone, and all of that. And at the time, I didn't. In my head, there was no other option. I was alone, and everybody was gone. But from my viewpoint now, it's like I did have options. I just didn't know how to access any of that at the time. And that carried through for a large part of my life, just because having done that, it sort of made those people not real anymore. So when they came back into my life, it was very hard to connect with that again, because these people had all died to me. Yeah. So yeah, moving forward through that, and then I destroyed all of this stuff, and the reason that this thought came in my head, because I sort of wanted to address this fact out loud, that like I did go through that, and that was like a process. But the interesting thing was, like, right, I think when I was 22, I was still carrying around a blanket and like a little teddy bear from the hospital when I was born, and I burned all of that at the same time. Maybe I was 23. I don't, like, somewhere. This is like mid 20s, so like 22, 25, somewhere kind of in there. I had been carrying this stuff around, and this is the crazy thing. It's like, to me, there was like nothing weird about that, even though I kept it like in a closet and kept it hidden. And but it goes to show like how desperately I wanted to be a little kid, and like and wanted that to be okay, like that I was still hanging on to that stuff like it was very important. And like by this time I had been convicted of like federal crimes, done all kinds of negative bad things, been a bad person of varying degrees. I had made a lot of pretty heavy decisions by that point in my life, and had kind of moved on more than once, and become successful more than once in different sort of avenues, and then destroyed my life. But like that little sliver was still there, and still like so incongruous with like the rest of who I was trying to be or pretending to be. And yeah, it's just crazy to think about, like trying to be so disconnected and so cold and so dead inside, and still like carting this thing around, like hoping that that one day it's like all gonna be okay. Um, but yeah, I destroyed all of that, and I disconnected from that life completely, because I was like, there's no turning back. There's never a scenario where this is ever going to be okay. None of it. I'm not that person. I never want to be that person. I never want to face that person. And there's nothing there. And like I said, I couldn't even look at the photo albums, like the cover of the photo albums. Just the thought of like what was in there. And again, this sort of comes back to the conflict of like that whole life had died for me. And then over time, you sort of get to this place where you start to have your own failings and make your own mistakes, and you stop being able to live in black and white, right and wrong. You stop to be. I couldn't hang on to being a victim anymore, because I had victimized so many people that like you can't say you're not the bully anymore, or that you're the one being bullied, or you're suffering when you're the problem. And so I had to start being the problem in my life, and facing that I was the problem and not all of these things that had happened to me. And then you don't have any way to sort of reflect back on who it was, or how you got here to the full extent, because you've sort of destroyed all of this stuff, all this record that this human ever existed. And like I said, you start to realize, when you realize that about yourself, then you start to realize that about everyone around you. Like everyone in your life in general is a dynamic person, and a lot of times you might give that grace and acceptance to a few close people, or maybe it's just tolerance, where you tolerate some negative behavior, but truly accepting that, like, negative outcomes are not always the result of malicious intention. And that a lot of times it was people doing the best that they could, and not getting it right. And then when you're able to just sort of look through the lens of your own life and realize, like, I've made countless more intentional mistakes than that. I've intentionally done a large number of things to hurt people or make lives worse, under the guise of victimhood or suffering or whatever justification worked for me at the time. And so, if I'm going to say that I'm not a horrible person, and I can look at these flawed people and see them as people doing the best they could with what they had, then that's like, it's pretty hard not to walk back the decisions you made, or the decisions or judgments that you made. I think I lost the plot a little bit on this one, but yeah, the whole point is just that don't ever hang on too tightly to your thoughts or ideas, no matter how deeply entrenched they are, because they might not be as real as they are to you. And at some point, your view might change. And I'm just speaking from my own personal experience on that. I definitely had a more coherent version of this in my head, but most things don't go according to plan. Well, here's to trying something different.